I was standing firm on the truth of God by speaking out his word and reminding myself and the enemy that I know who I am in Jesus. I anchored myself in truth and stayed connected to God. I discovered how to use my imagination to experience the goodness and the truth about God, to feel his presence near me and ground myself in his peace. The pressure finally lifted, even though the grief was still there. Not everything heavy is the enemy, but we don't ignore when it is. There is an enemy roaming around looking for the weak and the vulnerable, and he's trying to steal, kill, and destroy us. That wasn't something I was choosing. That was something pressing in. And that's the difference. Attacks feel intrusive, not chosen. And it tries to get you to agree with something you didn't choose. So what do we do when we are being spiritually attacked by the enemy? What do we do when we are being spiritually attacked by the enemy? We stand. Jesus already did everything for us. It's finished. And all we have to do is stand in the truth of what he's already done. Jesus models this for us. In Matthew 4, when it talks about when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness, Jesus was tempted to turn stones to bread. He was tempted to accept provisions outside of God's will. And when Satan said, "Throw yourself down if you are the Son of God, God will protect you," Jesus was being tempted to force God's will. And then when the enemy said, "I will give you all of this if you bow down and worship me," Satan was tempting him to take a shortcut to power, to get him to compromise. But every time Jesus stood and responded with scripture, he reminded the enemy the truth. And he reminded the enemy that he knew the truth and that he was secure in the truth. And then we look and we see how he was attacked when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. 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 I don't know why I have a hard time saying that word. And we can read about that in Matthew 26:36 through 46. He experienced oppressive sorrow, intense pressure, so intense that it made him sweat blood. But even though he was being spiritually attacked, Jesus still stands and he prays and he surrenders. Your will, Father, not mine. But Jesus didn't have strongholds. Jesus had no fortified lies. And that's why temptation had nothing to attach to. He had no false truths that he lived out because Jesus is the truth. And so then we ask ourselves, how do we protect ourselves? First of all, by keeping our armor on always, which we will learn about more in week 5. But if the battle of response is happening inside of us, then how we stay clear minded really matters. Because if we're not clear, we won't discern correctly. Now, this is where the enemy is real. And once again, we don't ignore this. In 1 Peter 5:8-9, it says, "Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in faith, because you know that the family of believers throughout the world is undergoing the same kind of sufferings." But notice, Peter doesn't tell us to be afraid. He tells us to be sober minded. So, what does sober minded mean? The Greek word sober minded comes from the word nepho, Nepho, nepho. And it literally means to be free from intoxication, to abstain from wine. But it also has a metaphorical meaning. Metaphorically, it means clear headed, self controlled, calm and steady, spiritually alert, not emotionally intoxicated. Peter is warning believers that the enemy works through fear, offense, panic, emotional reaction, deception, distraction. But a sober mind is a mind that isn't swept away by fear, isn't intoxicated by anger, isn't clouded by lies, isn't driven by impulse. It's stable. When the mind is intoxicated, we are easier to devour. Notice the progression. Be sober minded, clear thinking. Be watchful, spiritually aware. Because if you have an adversary,